Well, the sermon title today is, What Was God Thinking? Now, that question could apply to a lot of things, like armadillos. Or, as Sarah Helen asked me yesterday, what was God thinking? Making carrots healthy and calorie-free instead of chocolate.
Yeah!
I mean, really, what was God possibly thinking? Lots of questions we could ask. I'm sure we each have our own. But today our sermon by request topic comes from a specific question someone wrote down anonymously, as we have our sermons by request system. Ron Hartgrove, I'll never forgive you for this. When I say anonymous, oh, sorry. Ron's question, what was God thinking in giving us free will? Especially since our moral compasses seem so terribly broken. And I have the answer. Are you ready? I don't know. I don't know. But as I said last week, you might recall from my sermon, I quoted someone who said, the beginning of knowing, the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of understanding is in acknowledging that we don't know. So we're in just the right place today. So let's start there, acknowledging that we don't know. And let's start with this truth that the Holy Spirit is going to lead us to understanding. If not about carrots and chocolate, then at least about free will. Will you agree with me, please? God, thank you that you created us with brains and hearts that seek, spirits that long to understand. Thank you, God, that you created us to always be on a spiritual journey. So, Holy Spirit, truly lead us this morning. Lead us. Give us your light. Give us your courage. Give us the warmth of your flaming fire. That our hearts might be opened. That our souls might be healed. That our world might be whole. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, of course, this morning we have to start with Genesis, because that's where it all began, right? No pun intended. So, Charlie Frederickson read just a little bit this morning about a story that is classically known as the Fall. There, God has put Adam and Eve in the garden and has created this gorgeous place, kind of looks a lot like Florida. Huge, beautiful flowers. Fruit everywhere, mangoes falling off the trees. It's awesome. And God said, you can enjoy everything except that one thing. Don't touch that one thing. And of course, what do?
Touch the one thing.
And their eyes were opened. They had the knowledge of good and evil because, of course, the serpent led them there. And, well, we've been bad to the core ever since. Okay, I intended that pun, sorry. And that, according to many theologians, is how we got this thing called original sin. But you know what's interesting? Barbara Brown Taylor, who I have to quote every sermon now because I only have a few left, she quotes this great story about an Inuit hunter in Alaska who's talking with a missionary, and the Inuit hunter says, missionary, I want to ask you something. And the missionary says, well, what's that? And the Inuit hunter says, well, if I did not know about God and sin, would I go to hell? And the missionary said, no, of course not. Then why, the hunter asked, did you tell me? God, if you didn't want us to screw things up, then why did you tempt us in the first place? Why put the tree there at all? It was like this big, huge, divine setup. Because of course we're human. We're always going to want the one thing we can't have. Lucy, you can have everything in the world, but you can't have this music stand. No matter what, you can't, everything else you can have, but you cannot have this music stand. So what's the first thing Lucy's going to go for? The music stand. Because that's who we are. We are human beings. This myth about original sin, about the fall from grace, It kind of says that God set us up for it, right? Set us up to live in this thing called original sin. God created us with broken moral compasses and then said, okay, now you find your way back to Eden all by yourself. And that's why we have to be careful with myths. And what I mean by myth is the Bible is full of myths. And many of you have heard me say this before, but it always bears repeating. A myth is not something that is a truth. We tend to use the word that way in this day and age. And, oh, that's just a myth. Cold hard facts. That's what we believe in today. But in the history of humanity, it wasn't always that way. For centuries, for eons, myths were stories that told truths that were truer than anything else. Truths that really couldn't be communicated except with big stories that held deep meaning, whether or not they actually happened that way or not. So whether or not you believe that the earth was created in 7 days or 6 days and then God rested and we've been around 35,000 years or whatever it is, or whether you believe the creation story is a myth, didn't happen that way but it's got a deep truth, whatever you believe, the truth is we should be very careful with our myths because the truths we say they communicate can shape our lives in really deep ways. Myths give our lives meaning, but we must be careful with what we identify as the meaning, because that meaning will shape us. Like original sin. Many of us, especially those of you who are recovering Catholics, grew up with this interpretation of this creation story, this myth, that it gave us original sin. But actually, this thing about original sin comes from someone named St. Augustine. He came up with the notion of original sin. He declared that since the first human beings sinned, there in the Garden of Eden, then all human beings were born to sin. Now, to be honest, he was a little obsessed with the whole idea. He even believed that the actual act of exchanging sexual passion, shall we say, if it produced children, that very act put on the children original sin. That's another sermon. Wish we could get to it today. It's actually about 10 other sermons, but anyway. The point is, he was kind of obsessed with it. But the point for today is this one. The words original sin are not in the Genesis account of creation. And in fact, the words original sin are not anywhere in the Bible at all. The concept of original sin was put forward by Augustine, and it's not biblical. It didn't come from the Bible. It came from this person who lived 400 years after Jesus walked the earth. See what I mean about the importance we give to stories? How many of you today feel plagued by this thing of original sin? But no matter what, we're just brought to the core. Especially those of us who are, like us. This interpretation, it makes us bad from the very beginning, especially women. We're especially evil, yes? We're always destined to make bad choices in the attempt to have things our way. That's what this particular interpretation of this myth, this is the meaning that shapes our lives. But what if we look at it a different way? Now remember, I said from the very beginning, I really don't know the answer to Ron's question. But we can speculate, and we can wonder, and we can search, and we can question. So here's a question. What if God created everything in the way it all unfolded, because that was what we needed to grow? What if God's ultimate desire for us was not to condemn us forever to be carrying this burden of original sin, but God's desire was for us to have abundant life? I want you to think for just a moment. If you close your eyes, just indulge me for a second. I want you to think in your own mind about what your own personal Eden would look like. Just think for a moment. Daydream. Your personal Eden. A life of absolute perfection. No worries, no cares, no fears. Everything provided for you. Just one blissful day after another. Sure, we each have a different picture of what that looks like. Really think about it. And once you've got that picture, well, think about living there every day for eternity. Day in and day out for billions and billions of years. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Did anyone ever see, horrified I'm going to admit this, but it was a Star Trek movie that involved this thing called the Nexus. And the Nexus was this thing you could get to through this galactic whatever that was your perfect world. And you could only tell it wasn't real by this tiny little light that would shine here and there. And in the movie, the people who found their way into it, it was awesome for a little while. And then they'd see the little light, and they would know it wasn't real. But they were so torn between staying there in the Nexus and going back to reality. Because life in the eternal Eden, in the Nexus, is boring. Did anyone get that when they really thought about it? I did this exercise myself, and for a while I thought, oh wow, that's amazing. But then I thought about it. Forever. Never, ever, ever changing. And it might feel like abundant life at first, but I think after about the first billion years, it might start to feel like death. It's like a butterfly staying in its cocoon forever. And its real beauty never breaking forth out into the world. Am I crazy?
No.
Yeah.
Sorry, Helen.
But not for that.
Honey. I mean, the truth is we have to have struggle and pain to grow.
Amen.
When Sarah Helen and I first got here in March, Lent was right upon us. And the very first thing I did here was teach a book study on a book called If You Want to Walk on Water, You Have to Get Out of the Boat. And that book talks about this scientific study about amoebas. That these scientists put amoebas in absolutely their perfect environment. Perfect temperature, perfect food, perfect everything. And then they put some amoebas in a challenging environment, like they messed with the temperature and didn't feed them just right and all that. And they expected the ones in the perfect environment to thrive, but guess who died first? It was the amoebas in the perfect environment. It was the ones in the challenging petri dish that grew and multiplied and inherited the earth. We have to have struggle and pain to grow. God could hold us in that little cocoon forever, but our beautiful colored wings would never come forth. It's a little bit like a poem I shared, I don't know, several years ago. And I have to share it again today. It's not entirely perfect for this sermon, but I think that I'm sort of wanting to go back and share the things that I love the most in some of my sermons. And this poem kind of speaks to it. I'm sure probably most of you have read the poem Footprints in the Sand, right? About God carrying us. You know, one pair of footprints, we think we're all alone, but God said, no, that's when I was carrying you. That's when I was cocooning you. That's when I was holding you. Well, there's another poem that's a tiny bit of a parody of Footprints in the Sand, which I hesitate to share because I don't want it to look like I'm making fun of Footprints in the Sand, because I'm not. I love that poem. But I think this other one is good to remember too. It says, one night I had a wondrous dream. One set of footprints there was seen. The footprints of my precious Lord, but mine were not along the shore. But then some stranger prints appeared, and I asked, Lord, what have we here? Those prints are large and round and neat, but Lord, they are too big for feet. My child, God said in somber tones, for miles I carried you alone. I challenged you to walk in faith, but you refused and made me wait. You hemmed and hawed, you would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired and I got fed up, and there I dropped you on your butt. Because Because in life there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb, when one must rise and take a stand or leave their butt prints in the sand. Sometimes God just has to say, okay, well, I gave you free will because I got to leave you there. Because it's in getting to our own feet and getting through the sand with God, who never leaves us, that we find the abundant life that is God's desire for us. And I'll be the first to say, I hate this truth. I hate it. But it's also still true. And I wonder if this is why God gave us free will. Because if life is always perfect and if we are never challenged, eventually we are just suffocated to death. And there might be one other explanation. Again, I don't know for sure. I wonder if God gave us free will because everything in creation cries out for relationship. You know, when Adam and Eve were in that first blissful state, there was never any choice. They were put together, they were created, they had their life there. There wasn't really choice involved. Perhaps you've heard the old adage, if you love something or someone, set them free. If they come back to you, they are yours, and if they don't, they never were. I think perhaps God gave us free will because I don't think God wanted to be in relationship with house pets. It's not exactly the best analogy. Because, man, house pets, I don't know about you, but our animal companions give us some of the most amazing examples of God's love ever. I don't think God wanted to be in relationship with infants either. You know, Sarah Hall will tell you, I love babies. Love, love, love babies. My favorite is when they're in what I call the slug stage, you know? They don't talk, they don't interact, but oh, they're so cute. And their little heads smell so good, and you can just hold them, and it's just so sweet. They fall asleep sometimes. But if that's the only relationship you ever get with a child, it's not really them, is it? No. They're not to the point yet where they can make a choice. And I think God wanted to be in relationship with us. But it's not really real if we don't have the choice to be in the relationship to begin with. And when Adam and Eve ate the apple, regardless of what we may want to call it, whether it's original sin or an opportunity to grow, the point is they chose in that moment to receive the knowledge that then gave them the choice of whether or not to stay in a relationship with God. And the story of humanity has been off and running ever since, right? Because with us, with all of creation, everything is about relationship. God gave us the free will to choose to be in relationship or not with our Creator. And really just about everything we might define as sin is an act of broken relationship. And I think maybe that's why I struggled so much with this sermon this week. Because I've just been so sad. Sarah Helen and I are on this unbelievably nauseating emotional roller coaster. And I go in and out of all kinds of feelings, but this week's emotion was just sad. Because I'm sad about leaving. If you haven't heard the news, Sarah Helen and I are moving to Asheville in the middle of September. And our last Sunday here is going to be September 9th. And all week long, I've been in meetings and teaching classes and everything, and I just look at all of you and I just think, I love you so much. I'm just sad. And I don't cry much, because mostly I'm just kind of frozen. And then when I do cry, I have total, utter meltdowns. Sarah Ellen will tell you. And all I can think of is that God brought us here to be in relationship with you and to learn to be in relationship more deeply. And now we're supposed to take this gift you gave us and take it to people who don't have it yet. And that's what we're going to do. And And so I just want you to know today, I could not find an end to the sermon today. I just couldn't. Because I think the real meaning of it is the more I preached, the more I did this writing about God gave us free will because we were made to choose a relationship. Well, we did. We came here and we chose to be in relationship with all of you. And in some ways, that relationship will always continue because we'll always be connected in love and in the Spirit of Christ. Always. But I want to thank you for what you've given us. Because these have absolutely, positively been the best years of my life to this point. And I know Sarah and Helen would say the same thing. And that's because of you. And because of the love you've shared with us.
Change is good.
Yes, it is. And here's the thing. My fear as your pastor is that this free will thing will cause you to choose to not come. In MCC, we have this thing. Maybe it's in other churches, I don't know, but MCC has been my only adult experience in church. In MCC, we have this thing where, for whatever reason, I think because we often bring so much pain and so much woundedness to church because of who we are, because of our experiences, that when we find a church where we feel welcome and loved, a lot gets put on the pastor and the pastor's family. And it's not a bad thing, it's a natural human thing. Because, oh wow, here's a safe place, here's where I'm loved, here's the leader of this where I'm loved. And then if they leave, so often it can feel like, well, then I'm not going there. But if you make that choice with your free will after we're gone, then all the blessings that you have shared with Sarah, Helen, and I, it stops with us. And all those people out there who haven't come yet will never receive it from you. And all of you who need it day to day, because who among us doesn't need this love, right? Like every day, it won't be here. It will only be here because of the choice you make. So I don't have an answer entirely as to why God gave us free will. I only know that it is the deepest desire of God's heart that we take that free will and use it to make the choice to be in relationship together. And the church will survive any change if we can live that truth together. So I want to ask, we close this sermon today in a very different kind of way. I want to ask that we just take a few minutes. And as you feel comfortable, I want you to find someone in this church who has given you some blessing. And just say, thank you, I love you, I'm here for you. And if you're here for the first time today, MCC people, PB people, do not let anyone leave this church today that does not hear the words, you are loved in this place. That's the gift we give each other. Can we do that? Just for a few minutes? There's no hurry. I mean, I know we're hungry probably. Just as you feel comfortable, and if you can't do it, it's okay. Just go up to somebody and tell them, I love you, you matter to me, you bless me, whatever you want.